Welcome to the program. We're talking politics today, joined by Senator James Lankford, Republican, the junior senator representing the state of Oklahoma. And later in the program, Monte Brown will be discussing politics with U.S. Congressman Tom Cole. So we hope you enjoy today's program. Senator Lankford's in Duncan conducting a town hall meeting during the brief recess before they go back to session next week. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us a little bit. During today's conference that you had with some of the people, I'm sure one of the top topics was the Iran nuclear agreement. It's been in the news quite a bit. You've been one of the more outspoken critics of the deal. Talk a little bit about what you see the deal and what you think is wrong with it.
I want us to be able to get to a peaceful resolution with Iran. There's no question Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon. Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They're propping up Assad in Syria. They're doing the coup in Yemen. They're trying to lead a coup in Bahrain. They lead Hezbollah against Israel. No question they're a large state sponsor of terrorism. Now with them trying to acquire a nuclear weapon, we put sanctions in place, as the United States did, really tough sanctions on Israel, not on Israel, but on Iran. Right. Because of that, the president now wants to be able to negotiate with them and say, here's how to lift the sanctions. I want us to be able to actually get back to a normal relationship with Iran, but I first want to know they're not going to get a nuclear weapon. We don't get that with this agreement. Iran really needs three things to be able to get to a nuclear weapon. They need highly enriched uranium, they need a triggering device, and they need some sort of launch vehicle. We're not inspecting for the triggering device or the launch vehicle, only doing the uranium. Well, we already know they know how to do the highly enriched uranium. They've proven that they can do that. Under this agreement, they get to keep their most advanced centrifuges, which even the president has acknowledged those centrifuges would only be used for a nuclear weapon. There's no reason to have those advanced centrifuges for medicine or for nuclear power. They control all of the inspections. The way the inspections are written in the agreement is that Americans cannot be a part of the inspection team, only UN inspectors without an American. The inspectors have to notify Iran about a month in advance before they come to a site. When they get to a site, they're not allowed to actually inspect the site. They can come as far as the front gate, make a request to the workers that are there. The workers will go in and take a sample, the Iranian workers will, and then the Iranians will bring the sample out to the inspectors, who will then leave and go test it. That's not a real inspection. So we're not really inspecting, we're not really limiting their ability on the triggering device or the launch vehicle, and we're not removing their ability to be able to do highly enriched uranium by taking out the centrifuges. This doesn't take away the possibility of them getting a nuclear weapon, so I've had to oppose it. And some folks have said it's because you're Republican, the president's a Democrat. Right. That's just not true. Even outspoken Democrats like Chuck Schumer from New York has been very outspoken to say this is not best for America. So it's not a partisan issue, it's a policy issue.
Talk to me about why there hasn't been, in your opinion, this same kind of opposition, though, from Europe. This wasn't just a uniquely American arrangement with Iran. Other partners have signed off on it.
Yeah, they have, actually. The sanctions that as they're put in place are really American sanctions. What we did several years ago is we said you cannot do business with the United States and with Iran. So if you want to do business with Iran, you can. You just can't do any business with any American company. Mm-hmm. Well, every country around the world has just stopped doing business with Iran then because they want to still do business with the United States. Right. The area all around Europe, all around the Gulf region, multiple other locations, they want to restart again that economic activity. Right. They also don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. But Europe, remembering some of the major players that are here, when you talk about the P5+1 group, that's Russia, China, Germany, France, United Kingdom, and us. So Russia and China want to be able to sell arms again to Iran, so they want to reopen to that. For the United Kingdom, for Germany, and for France, there's some economic benefits of getting their oil from Iran, and they also want to do a rail line that actually connects everywhere from Pakistan all the way up into Europe. That can't happen until these sanctions are lifted. So they're looking at the economics. We, quite frankly, have to look at the national security issue. Iran calls the United States the Great Satan. They say they're heading to be the destruction of the United States. They're not saying that about France. They're saying that about us. And so we have to be attentive to national security more than they do.
If the deal, and at this point it looks like the Democrats do have enough to have a veto-proof minority in the Senate if and when the deal is disapproved by the Republican majority. So, I mean, you're going to go ahead and be on record, I know, to say we don't approve the deal. What happens next, though? I guess that's the big question, is in the absence of a deal, is no deal at all better than the one that you've got?
It would be better for us to leave the sanctions in place now, force Iran back to the table, and to do some very basic things. When we do inspections, you can actually go on site and do inspections, not agree to inspections from a distance, but actually doing on-site inspections. Taking away their more advanced centrifuges. There's no reason for them to have those centrifuges if they're not going to be used for nuclear power. Those need to come out of country. That assures they can't use that to be able to actually create weapons-grade uranium. And then to make sure that we actually have some sort of ongoing conversation about not only where they've been, but where they're going in their nuclear research. This current agreement doesn't give us any of the history of what they've done. They come to the table with nothing. It's difficult to inspect and to find out what they're doing if we don't know where they're coming from. Those three things would make this deal very, very different. They are achievable in negotiations, and I wish the president would have stayed at it until they actually achieved that.
Is there a way, though, you talk about getting Iran back to the table, you've also got to go back to your P5 partners and ask them to come back to the table with you?
Actually, as odd as it sounds, we actually don't. The way the sanctions are put in place, it's very simple. The Congress passed a rule that you can't do business with the United States and with Iran. So all we have to do is leave those sanctions in place. We're in the exact same position. All the European partners that want to do business with Iran can put additional pressure on Iran and say, hey, if we're going to do business, you've got to be able to sign a better agreement than this, and it pushes them back to the table. So it's not a matter of getting the band back together and so they can get it actually done. It's a matter of actually leaving the sanctions there and forcing the international pressure to be able to resolve this.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break and continue our conversation with U.S. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program, visiting with U.S. Senator James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, in Duncan, conducting a town hall meeting. Let's talk a little bit about budget. People have pretty good memory about government shutdowns and that kind of thing. Give us some confidence that we're not going to go through that again here in the next few months.
I can't give you 100% confidence on that because we still haven't resolved the budget issues. The Senate has, for the first time since 2009, passed all 12 appropriations bills through committee. Okay. That's a great start. The Senate and the House have done a unified budget. That hasn't happened since 2001 to actually lay out a path to try to get us to a balanced budget over the next 10 years. That's a very positive thing. So the mechanics are in place. Okay. It all still comes down to the end of September, though. Right. That's when the fiscal year ends. We've currently got a little bit of dispute between the Republicans and the Democrats. We want to be able to increase defense spending a little bit. They've taken a pretty big hit over the last couple of years, so we want to increase defense spending. Democrats have said they will only increase defense spending if everything else increases at the same rate. But we just don't believe the IRS and the EPA and all these other groups need the same increase that defense does. And so we're at a little bit of a stalemate right now. We'll have to finish that negotiation in September. But at the end of the day, we really believe national security should be first, and it should be the area that pops up in our budget, not the other areas. Leave the other areas where they are now, or bump a little, but not the same we do defense.
Let's talk a little bit about energy in Duncan. That's a big deal with Halliburton, the richly tied to oil and gas industry. We've seen the price of oil dip. It has taken a little bit of a run back up to some degree. I mean, where's the balance there? I mean, people love the fact that gas prices might be down around $2 a gallon, but it also hurts oil field workers at times.
It is a double-edged sword for us. I mean, the consumers do love the lower prices. Anyone who does manufacturing, anyone who does distribution of their supplies loves the lower prices for gasoline, which is good. But when you have oil this low, where it is right now, you can't keep production levels up, and it exposes us more to international pressure. So we want to have American energy. That becomes a key part of it. Part of the battle we face right now is actually tied back to what we talked about before about Iran. The president has worked very hard for the last year to lift the sanctions on Iran and their sale of oil worldwide, but we still have a limit on Americans being able to sell their oil worldwide. We should be able to both produce our own oil, and when we produce in excess of what we need, to be able to also put that on the world market to be able to sell it. We're at that spot as Americans, which is amazing to us. You think back just 10 years ago, we were talking about running out of oil. Now there's been so much discovered, we understand we have an excess, we can sell it around the world. We need to lift that. We have a plan in place this fall to be able to do it. I'm trying to actually get it on the highway bill that's working its way through the House of Representatives right now. I've talked to multiple members of the House to try to include that into the highway bill so we can conference with the Senate. But there are several vehicles, what are called legislative vehicles, that are moving, that we can get an export of oil from the United States lifted. That'll be extremely important to us in the days ahead. That's a lot of jobs and a real benefit to our economy to do that.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about education and what you see the role of federal government is in education. In the state of Oklahoma, we had a little bit of an uproar, as other states did, with Common Core. Where do you see the federal government government, their role in local education, or is there a role for it?
There's really not, and that's the interesting thing. Constitutionally, the state actually drives all the decision making on education. That is uniquely state and local responsibility. So education starts first at home. Parents have the responsibility not to send their kids off necessarily and say, you do everything for me. Parents should educate their own kids and make sure they're getting a good education and they're staying engaged with them in their homework and helping them. Every single study shows the more a parent is engaged in their child and helping with homework or making sure that homework is done and encourage them, that child does much better at school. A parent that's disengaged with their child, that child does not succeed to the same level as they do at school. So parents can't just send their kids off to school and assume everything's going to be taken care of. Second thing is schools and states make that decision. The federal government really has no role in education constitutionally, and my push has been to try to eliminate anything that we can from the federal government side that requires all these things from the states and has them manipulated. There's just a lot of unique innovation that can be done in a state of 4 million people, given the opportunity that we can compete with Arkansas and Kansas and Texas and New Mexico and try to have this competition among our region of who can do the best education. That happens when there's fewer federal regulations.
It's a tough tightrope to walk that you admit in terms of federal government overreach, because for some people that federal government is a good thing to have around. Whenever the disaster comes in, FEMA comes in with some money. The farmers like what they get from the federal government. We like an interstate highway that'll go through here. How difficult is it to figure out when it's overreach and when it's needed?
Sure, yeah. The Constitution obviously gives multiple areas like national defense. That's clearly an area. Infrastructure is clearly an area that we should have the federal government engaged. Those are uniquely governmental things. But it also has that responsibility that everything else really goes back to the states and local folks so they can make better decisions, faster decisions. The longer you're waiting on a permit or some kind of permission from the federal government, everyone knows it drives the cost up. Keystone Pipeline is a great example of that. Keystone XL Pipeline has waited 7 years on a federal permit just across the international border. Every state has already permitted that and checked it off, waiting for the federal government to be able to do their part of it. There are lots of other examples that are like that, and I'm most definitely not anti-government. I've tried to explain that to a lot of folks. I'm for the government in the right spot, doing their business, staying in their lane, and doing what's in their lane extremely well.
Less than a minute, your take on the Republican presidential race, which is wide open at this point. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, you think, generally for the party to have that many choices this late?
It's still a good thing for everyone to have that many choices. We're Americans. We like lots of choices. That number will be limited pretty quickly. By the time we get to February of next year, we'll probably be down to 3 or 4 candidates that are still left, just based on their fundraising and their organization, and people will just lose attention with some folks. So it's a good thing. I was a person that never run for any political office at all before, and so when I ran, everyone kind of counted me out and said, he's not in the political world, so there's no way he'll make it. Well, obviously I did, and Oklahomans said, okay, we want someone different to get involved in the race. So I'm all for that. Everyone get engaged, stay engaged.
Appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
Glad to do that. Thanks.
U.S. Senator James Lankford, the junior senator representing the state of Oklahoma, has been our guest today. We appreciate you taking the time. We're going to take a break and come back. Monte Brown will join us. He'll be joined by U.S. Congressman Tom Cole of the 4th District. Stick around.
Welcome to the second half of This Week in Texoma. I'm Monte Brown, and now joined by Congressman Tom Cole from Oklahoma's 4th District. Good to see you again.
Great to be here.
You've got a town hall meeting that you're attending today, and by the time this airs, you might be back in Washington. The new session's about to start.
Probably will be, actually.
Yes. So tell us, what are the big issues coming up for the rest of this session? Obviously, we're hearing a lot about the Iran nuclear deal.
That'll be the dominant issue, really, opening week and maybe into the next week. Congress will vote on that. It'll clearly vote to disapprove the bill and send that, or the agreement. They'll send that to the President. The President will veto it. And it looks now like he's got the votes in the Senate to sustain it, but we'll see. There'll also be pretty early on a continuing resolution. All government funding runs out September 30th. The CR will just keep it going at current levels, probably through about mid-December, so a larger budget deal can be negotiated. We'll have a vote to lift the ban on petroleum exports, which would be pretty important for our industry here in Oklahoma. That will certainly pass the House. The Senate, we're not sure, but it'll either pass or perhaps get attached to another piece of legislation. And then as you look further down, we'll have an education bill. The two houses have both passed a reauthorization of No Child Left Behind that have changed it, reformed it, hopefully made it more flexible, fewer mandates for folks. A new cybersecurity bill, again, is passed in 2 different forms in the House and the Senate. That'll come up in the fall. But the big deal will be trying to get a long-term budget agreement that will, one, put money in the transportation fund so we keep building roads, two, make sure that the debt ceiling is taken care of, because if you reach it, you actually shut down the government effectively, and three, avoid sequestration, which happens on January the 1st, and would be $40 billion worth of cuts to the American military. So
we're going to start hearing about that again.
You're going to hear about it again. So there needs to be a larger deal, otherwise that takes place, and my hope is the two sides can agree, but it'll be tough. It has to be done during a presidential campaign.
Absolutely.
So that intervened, and you've
How difficult does that
a lot,
make it?
because you have four candidates for president that are actually sitting in the United States Senate now, with Senators Cruz and Rubio, Rand Paul, and Lindsey Graham, and they're all good guys. But I guarantee you, they will be thinking about, how does this impact my presidential campaign? It will make them less likely to vote for an agreement. You've got also just a difficult situation. You have a Republican House where Republicans, pretty conservative, can do what they want. The Senate is Republican controlled, but no bill can come to the floor without Democratic support, because we only have 54, it takes 60. So they'll have something to say about that. And then you got a pretty liberal Democratic president has to sign it. So you're going to have a deal that I guarantee you makes the left wing of the Democratic Party and the right wing of the Republican Party upset, because there's going to have to be some give and take, and neither side's going to achieve all its objectives. And that'll increase the pressure on members, because it'll be, well, if they'd have done it my way, we would have gotten everything we wanted. Well, that's just not going to happen given the distribution of political power across the spectrum. We've got to be able to compromise.
I was going to ask you, we talked about it before we started taping, about is that what you're hearing at some of the meetings that you're going to, and more people people frustrated, saying that Republicans asked, give us control of Congress, and you've got it now, and they're still saying that things aren't being done.
Yeah, well, actually quite a bit's been done, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. I mean, there's actually more legislation that's passed any time than in the last 5 years. Sometimes it doesn't work out the way we'd like. Keystone's a good example. We actually passed it. The president vetoed it. We couldn't override. But there's been major legislation in health care, major deficit reduction. I mean, deficit's down from $1.4 trillion to about $430 billion. That's actually pretty rapid decline, and that's been done by some hard work on the part of Congress. Major legislation on veterans reform, VA overhaul, suicide prevention bill, human trafficking bill, major legislation giving the president the ability to negotiate trade deals. So it's actually been a pretty productive Congress, but this last part of it is going to be very contentious on the budget. And again, people have to understand, just because we can do what we want in the House, we've repealed Obamacare, gosh, I don't know, 50, 60 times. The Senate hadn't had a vote on it because the Democrats won't let them take it up. And to be fair, if we had to vote on it and it got to the president, not likely to repeal Obamacare, well, a guy named Obama is president. He can veto it, and you're not going to override that. So I think sometimes people are unrealistic in what they think can be accomplished. You just got to win more elections. You change the presidency, you change the whole place pretty dramatically, because all of a sudden, instead of having a president working against a Republican Senate and Republican House, you've got one working with a Republican Senate and House. And this stuff becomes a lot easier to pass and get into law.
We've got about a minute till we're going to take a break, but I wanted to talk about Pope Francis coming to visit and going to actually speak in Congress.
Yeah, it's actually the first time a Pope has ever done that, so you can imagine there's a great deal of excitement. And he's an awfully charismatic figure. I mean, he's a guy that I think has genuinely caught the imagination of people all over the world. And so we're all excited and honored to have him come. I can tell you the hottest ticket in town is the one ticket every member has that they can
one
get.
ticket, huh?
That's something. Yeah, that's just one. That's all they've got. But so it'll be an historic and memorable moment.
Okay, well, we'll take that break, and then we're going to come back and talk about the 2016 race.
Absolutely.
A little bit more with Congressman Tom Cole.
If you have a topic or issue you'd like us to focus on, please write to the address on your screen or fax us at 357-3811. Or you can email us.
And welcome back. We're talking to 4th District Congressman Tom Cole about the 2016 race now for the White House. And all the talk at this point, up to this point, most of the talk anyway, has been Donald Trump. What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, I've never seen a race like this. Normally, Republican races are pretty predictable. There's a front runner, there's a challenger. The challenger scares the front runner for a little while, and the front runner wins. And that appears to be what's happening on the Democratic side, but we look a lot more like a Democratic primary, you know, chaotic, colorful, people coming from all over. It's not like the staid Republican stuff. Which actually I think long-term is good. I mean, I think the attraction of interest, and it's a very good quality field. You've got 7 or 8 current and former governors running. You've got 4 sitting United States senators and a former one running. You've got these 3 outsiders who are actually leaders in a lot of the polls, both nationally and in the early primary states. So, again, wide open. I still think it's more likely to be one of the governors than anybody else. Because I think the senators are running from the Senate, and that's not a very popular institution, although I'd certainly keep my eye on Ted Cruz. I think he's running a very, very good campaign, and he's in a position, if Trump were to falter for some reason, to inherit a lot of that support, maybe some of Carson's support. But these outsiders are, quote unquote, real factors. Now, they're not all real outsiders. I mean, Carly Fiorina, who I think has actually done the best job on the debate side of this so far, you know, did run for the Senate in California, has been a surrogate for 2 Republican presidential nominees in McCain and Romney. So she's actually very experienced politically.
And people probably wouldn't know that.
Yeah, well, they don't. And so, and look, her principal background is private business, and she's running on that, and I don't blame her. But I can also see a more polished pro up there. She's not committed any errors that I've seen. And I wouldn't say, with all due respect, that's true of the other 2 more visible characters. So if they're going to make it, and I'm not saying they can't, they certainly can, any of them win the nomination, but we've never elected somebody directly from private life into the presidency in the history of the country.
And is that what people want at this point? Are they wanting somebody that...
Well, they want it, but they don't. They also don't know as much about him as they do somebody that's governed. You know, Ronald Reagan had been governor for 8 years. Bill Clinton had been governor for, gosh, 14 years. So you knew they had a track record. It's a lot different to be president than CEO of your own company. You really can't look at a United States senator and say you're fired. It's a very different line of work, and you can pontificate all you want on the campaign trail, but again, you know, the Congress of the United States doesn't have to do what you want them to do, and the Supreme Court is certainly a very independent body as well. So, you know, I think as you come to grips with that reality, people tend to look for somebody that's got a background that suggests they can be successful. The last person to be elected to the presidency with no electoral background was Dwight Eisenhower. Wow. And he'd won a war. And the last person before him with no time in public office was Ulysses Grant, and he'd won a war. So that's a little bit different level of experience. These other 3 are very remarkable and distinguished people, no doubt about it, but whether or not over the long term the electorate will see any of them as having the necessary qualification experience to get the most important, most powerful, most responsible job in the world, I think that remains to be seen. But hey, it's going to be a great, it may not be uplifting or educational, but it's going to be entertaining.
It will be. Is that part of it, though? 16 candidates, I believe that was the number. Is that really speaking to what's going on with the Republican Party, just how widespread it is for views?
I think that part of this is about the Republican Party defining who it is and what it believes. And when you've got a president, you know, you sort of get to skip that debate. The president sort of defines who you are. This same thing, is, by the way, is going on the Democratic side. I mean, when Bernie Sanders is getting crowds of 28,000, this is a guy that's not a Democrat. He's a socialist and didn't become a Democrat in name until this year. And yet he's 7 points ahead in New Hampshire and within 7 points to Hillary Clinton. You've got the vice president obviously thinking about this. That could change the complexion of that race. So both sides are in a little bit of a chaotic mode right now. You know, again, I think it's going to take a while to sort through this. I think, but I look at the field and I can see 7 or 8 that are very plausible presidents of the United States and very capable people given their record. So, you know, I have a lot of confidence in the Republican electorate. They'll think it through. These are the same people that picked Ronald Reagan. They're pretty smart. And I think they'll pick the best candidate in the field, and we'll go forward. Democrat primary voters, by the way, are very similar. These are usually your most engaged voters, your best informed voters. They're paying attention, and they may have an opinion, but at the end of the day, as the election gets closer, they start really thinking about it a lot because they know it's a consequential decision, and they usually give us pretty good choices in the fall. So I think it'll be wild, but at the end of the day, the Republican Party will be better off for having gone through this discussion and debate.
Well, real quick, we're less than a minute now, but we're just learning that the Oklahoma State Republican Party Chairman, Randy Brogdon, plans on resigning. Your thoughts on that?
Well, again, you always hate to lose a chairman, but that's his choice. I don't know anything more about the circumstances. I suspect there's going to be several capable people that offer themselves. Again, he had capable and very seasoned opposition when Randy won. It was a little bit of an upset. So I think you'll see some of those same names in there again. But it's a very different electorate. It's done now by the Republican State Committee, not by a Republican convention. So that's a comparatively small group, 4 people from every county, and state legislators are members of that, and what have you. So again, it's certainly possible some name could emerge that none of us have heard of, that this small group knows and thinks would be the right person to lead the party. But once they make the choice, again, I'll do what I can to be helpful.
All right. Well, Congressman Tom Cole, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll be seeing what's going on in Congress in the fall.
Thanks, Monte.
Thanks for joining us for This Week in Texoma.
If you have a topic or issue you'd like us to focus on, please write to the address on your screen or fax us at 357-3811. Or you can email us.